Well, hello everyone. I believe we're live, but it's always a wonky beginning when we do these. So I'm going to chat a little bit to make sure our pages are up and running. Excited to be here and talk about friends with everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. So friendships are important to how we live. Having a friend impacts everything from our health to our mental well-being. Being in a friendship can be a source of stress relief, it can be confidence, it can be joy. But for many people with disabilities, building and keeping meaningful friendships is very challenging. The Center for Disability Leadership, along with the Center for Family Involvement at VCU's Partnership for People with Disabilities, is excited to host this important discussion on fostering friendships. And we want everyone watching to be a part of it. And those of you who watch this when we're not live, we want you to just go ahead and comment or message us. For anyone watching us now, just please post your questions or comments in the comments section, and I'll share them with our panel as we go along. So today we're joined by Dr. Matthew Bogenshutz, who's at the VCU's School of Social Work. We've got Angela West, cultural broker at the Center for Family Involvement. She's going to use Daniel Foster as her interpreter. Jessie Monroe is the liaison to A Life Like Yours, Self-Advocacy Alliance. And Tonya Milling is the executive director at the Arc of Virginia. I'm Erin Croyle. I am the communications specialist at the Center for Family Involvement. I'll be posting everyone's full bios in the comments as we go along. And because we're live and someone rang my doorbell, the dog is barking. I apologize for that. Live from home in a pandemic, this is what we get, right? I think the dog's quiet now. So let's dive right in. We're gonna start with talking about why friendships are so important, why they're good for our health. Matt, we're going to turn to you first. How do we benefit from having a robust social network and especially friends?
So I think there are a number of reasons, and we can talk a lot about how having social connectedness relates to both physical health and to your emotional health. But think about it. If you have good, solid friendships, you are more likely to feel happy when you're with your friends. Your friends can help you through tough times and therefore reduce some of the stress that you have in your life. And they can make you feel like you're connected to something bigger and like you have a real sense of belonging in the world. And all of that's really, really good for your emotional well-being. We all want to feel included. When we're emotionally well and happy, our bodies are oftentimes more happy as well. The mind and the body are very, very much connected. So social inclusion helps us with both body and mind. But to take it even farther back, I want you in the audience to think about your own lives, right? What are the things that make you feel most full as a person, right? I know for me, it's thinking about times I've spent with my family and friends doing things that I love, right? When I was younger, it was spending time with my friends on the soccer field. I had that sense of camaraderie with my teammates, and I had a sense of purpose, and we laughed a lot together, and I felt really full by doing that. Nowadays, it's times I spend hanging out with my friends or spending special moments with my partner, right? These are the times in life that anchor us most and make us feel most whole, even more so than work or where we live. These kinds of issues that we oftentimes think about the most in the disability field, about where we work or where we live. But to me, even more important than any of those is what we do and what we feel whole with. And that's what we're talking about with social inclusion. So that to me is why it's so important to talk about this particular topic.
Thank you, Matt. You know, I want to hear from Angela and Jessie about how this impacts them, not just you, but also the people that you serve in your work. Angela, let's start with you. Angela, I've got to unmute you. Hold on, I'm so sorry. For some reason, I can't unmute you.
Sorry.
You're good.
I'm so I do for people with disabilities. The social network is so important.
I think that for people with disabilities, the social network is very important.
Because it's where we get connected with people who choose to be around us.
Because it's where we can get connected with people who choose to be around us.
I like to say, because my family, I was born into.
I like to also include my family in that.
Yeah, so that know that people choose to be with you and spend time with you and get to know you.
People who choose to spend time with you and get to know you.
And get to know what you're good at and what you need help with.
And they're there for when you need to connect and when you need help with things.
Yeah, and the good times and the bad times.
Through the good times and the bad times.
So without our friends, I really don't know where I would be.
So without my friends, I really don't know where I'd be.
Thank you, Angela. Jesse, how about you?
Well, friendship is really important because, you know, these are people that know you very well and that basically they accept you for who you are, and they're also willing to be around someone with disability either because they want to or because they are disabled themselves. And there's certain things that you can talk to them about that you can't talk to about anyone else. And which is, I think, kind of different from family. While family is very important to me, there's certain things you can't talk about with family. And so I think that's why friendship in particular is important. And it's even more so these times because you can't go out and do things like we want to, like we used to. So it's you have to lean on the people you know even more, so you're not as lonely.
You're muted, Erin.
I'm muted now. It's the mute day. It's such a tough time for all of us, but for people with disabilities, it's always hard, frankly. And the statistics are pretty dire. Now, we want this to be a solutions-based discussion, but we do need to touch on why this is such a critical conversation to have. Matt, can you share some of your findings?
Sure, I'll share findings from the field in general, rather than just my findings, because I want to paint the broader picture. I think that's really important here. So the first thing I'll say is when we're talking about social inclusion, we're really talking about two things. We're talking about the social relationships, like friendships or family relationships. And then on the other hand, we're talking about community participation. If you put those things together, you get social inclusion. So we have research about both of these two sides of the coin, and neither one of them is particularly good news. In terms of the social relationship parts, there's been quite a bit of research about the size of people's social networks, like how many solid connections they have in their life. And a lot of that research has come back to show that people with disabilities in general have smaller networks than people without disabilities. And the people with intellectual disabilities have networks that are even smaller than people with just physical disabilities. Where it gets really shocking to me is that the average network size of people with disabilities in well-conducted research is usually only around 3 people, right? And a lot of times, those 3 people do not include anyone without a disability or anyone who's not a paid caregiver. So this shows that people with disabilities have very little interaction, meaningful interaction, with folks who do not have disabilities in their social relationships, which is hugely, hugely troublesome, I think, to all of us. The direct support professionals that support, especially adults with disabilities, are a huge component of improving this. And they try their best, but they're oftentimes really stretched thin. And there's also research to suggest that direct support professionals have to weigh their work more towards like the daily living type tasks, more so than social inclusion type tasks. So that all goes into the social relationships piece. The other piece of this that I haven't touched on yet is like the nature of the relationships. So we also know that intimate relationships, whether that's like a super close friendship or a partnership or a romantic relationship or a sexual relationship, are really rare for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as well. So it's not just the amount of relationships, it's the quality of those relationships as well. Then on the other side of things, we have the community participation piece of social inclusion. And we know in this regard that there are some things that can work, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. But we also know that the community members need support in including people with disabilities into the broader society. There's research that says that people in the community are willing and want to welcome people with disabilities more into their communities, but they don't know how. And if you don't know how to do something, you don't endeavor to do it, right? So, and we also know that people with disabilities are sometimes afraid to step into new spaces. So we really need to do some training on both sides, both the people with disabilities and community members, in order to help make community inclusion happen. So I'll leave it at that for now, but more to come on practical solutions.
Thank you, Matt. Tonya, what are you seeing in your work at the Arc of Virginia?
It's seeing those statistics in real life, right? Like I would imagine Angela and Jesse can share from maybe their own lives, but also people that they know. We talk to families and we talk to people with disabilities a lot. And they do report these things. You can see it, whether it's said or you can see it in people's actions. And so we see it happen all the time. And I think that it's about intentionality. And it's really hard, right? Matt, you actually said something that made me think about that push that the direct support professionals have when you're so busy with your work. And maybe we've gone out to a restaurant and I've got to focus as a direct support professional first on those goals that you have to meet. And so I focus on that instead of connecting with the person who's sitting at the table next to us having coffee, where there might be a natural connection. And I think that's just a strain that we hear from direct support professionals themselves and providers and agencies. They feel that pressure. And it does take time. We all have to nurture our relationships. All of us do. And sometimes people with disabilities are going to need more support and help to be able to do that. And it's just really hard. I think we have to find ways to make sure that the staff are supported, the direct support professionals, to be able to help people make those connections and then nurture them.
Thanks. Jesse and Angela, can you talk about this a little bit? Jesse, we'll start with you.
Yes, I think what I see is absolutely true. I have a pretty short network, a small network of friends as well, and I do see that with others with disabilities. It is harder to make meaningful friendships. It's very difficult, especially with a romantic relationships. I think I found that very difficult, and I know others with disabilities have as well. So none of that surprises me, and I think support staff do their best to help with that. But it's like what Tonya said, they have to make sure they do the core function of their job, and that has to come first. So yeah.
Thanks. And I want to add, we were talking about romantic relationships. CFI, the Center for Family Involvement, and the Center for Disability Leadership, we have 2 live discussions planned in January and February about that. So stay tuned for events to get posted. Angela, how about you? What are you seeing in your life when we talk about this research?
One of the things that I struggle with is direct support staff and becoming friends with them.
One of the things that I struggle with is direct support staff and becoming friends with them.
I spend so much of a day with them, and coming into the house and taking care of you.
And I spend so much of my day with them as they come into my house and take care of me.
And spend time with me and my partner, David.
And spend time with me and my partner, David.
A lot of the time, we become really close because it is the time that you spend with them.
A lot of the times we become very close because of the lengths of time that we spend with them.
And then we have to move on to another job or go back to school. It's life changing because it's like a wake up kind of shoulder and then we work.
And when they have to move on to a new job or back to school, would you mind repeating that last part, Angela?
It's Croyle. You have to take goodbye to them. It's really hard sometimes when you are really close to someone.
And it can be really hard sometimes to adjust to that change as we've become very close.
And sometimes they call me and we continue that friendship.
And sometimes they'll call me and we can continue that friendship.
Yeah, I have one that she's like my sister.
And I have one who is like a sister to me.
But I have many that I never talk to after they walk out the door.
And but there are many that I never talk to again once they walk out the door.
And that's heartbreaking for me.
And that's really heartbreaking for me.
It's also complicated, I think, in those lines. A little brightness. Tammy commented, she's like, so can we schedule open chat group Zoom times? So people can just chat together. It can be topic based or just an open topic, but put a time limit on it. And it's a really great idea. So CDL will certainly explore that. Let's see, Matt, you've been researching this for a while, so have, peers in your field. Let's start talking about what works. How can we make it better?
Okay, so I have a lot of ideas on this. The challenge with social inclusion is that there are a lot of ideas and there are a lot of people who have done some really interesting things at small scale. But those things are really, really difficult to bring up to larger scale. So I'm going to share some ideas of some things that have worked at smaller scale. And then we can talk a little bit about how we might be able to make them bigger. So number one, and I feel like this is the easiest one and the hardest one to make bigger, is I think it takes a change of mindset. I think that as someone who's worked as a professional in the IDD field for 25 years at this point, I think that we have a mindset that presence in the community is what we need to aim for. But that is simply not true. Presence in the community is not being of the community. And so I think that in order to move towards greater social inclusion, we need to change our mindset past presence. And there are reasons why presence has been our focus. Going back to the institutional times in the 1960s and 70s, and even today to some extent. Getting a presence in the community is a first step towards inclusion. But now that we've kind of gone into a post institutionalized living situation, mostly for most folks, I think we can think bigger. And so I think a change in mindset is one of the most important pieces of all this. I think that we also can do more to build on natural connections. Some of the most successful initiatives that have been tried have been where we take sort of a natural place and natural people around someone with a disability and try to build that connection to be more whole, more robust. So for example, there have been a number of initiatives that have worked with church congregations for people with disabilities. So someone with a disability goes to a certain church. Obviously, there are lots of people without disabilities who go there as well. And so you can build on that shared faith in order to bolster connection. Same thing goes with something like unified sports. Some of you may be familiar with Special Olympics unified sports, where you have people with and without disabilities on the same sports teams playing together. That's another great way to build on natural connections to build social inclusion. So I think we can scale up some things like that. And then there have been a number of examples of places that have done really smaller, more organic things to build social inclusion within neighborhoods or smaller communities through neighborhood events and that sort of thing. Seattle did a really good job of that back in the early 2000s. I think that there was also a group in Savannah, Georgia, who's doing some nice things with like community gardening sort of initiatives. So there are some examples of like community-based stuff that we can learn from and try to take to scale in other locations. That being said, the world has changed dramatically in the last year. And we're not exactly sure what social inclusion for anybody with or without a disability is going to look like post-COVID. So I think we need to also have an awful lot of flexibility going forward, and we need to really keep a close eye on what social inclusion looks like for everyone, not just people with disabilities.
It's so fascinating. It's interesting to me how we throw the word inclusion out, but unless you really do it right, it's not, it's not meaningful.
It's that natural piece that you talked about, right, Matt? I mean, like thinking about gardening. If I'm interested in gardening and you're interested in gardening, that's the connection. It's whatever happens to be that human connector. Sometimes we have to think about us as support systems maybe getting out of the way and letting those things take place.
Well, Tonya, I was going to turn to you next. I mean, why don't you tell me what you see? And I mean, not just your work at the ARC, you've been in this field for a long time. So, how do you see this changing?
Yeah, I think the good thing is seeing that our services in Virginia, but everywhere, are changing, and we want to focus on, we want to pay for, and we want to measure the things that are important to people, what really matters. And relationships are one of those things, and connections, and being involved and doing the things that you want to do in your neighborhood, in your community, in your world. So it's good to know that we have more services, for example, in our DD waiver system, like community engagement, in-home, things that are personalized and individualized and really help the person to foster the relationships that are in their life. I think we have a ways to go, but it's good to see those things changing and being paid for. I think we could probably, as a system, focus more on measuring that, not just having that service, but then measuring how that's changing people's lives. Are their number of relationships really going up? Is their health improving? Because we know that relationships, like you mentioned earlier, Matt, really can relate to our health. So how are those things changing? And I think that rather than always counting, did we check this goal, this goal, this goal, we really need to think about the person and what matters to them. I think that remembering that, human is human. All of us make relationships the same way or in similar ways. And a lot of times, I think throughout the years, in the time that I've worked with people, it's remembering to honor and respect that we're all kind of the same. And that, if I connect with classmates through Facebook, well, most of us do, but are we taking the time and intention to help somebody else do that? And it does take a lot of time, but you really have to honor those things that are just part of being us. It makes me think about a story from early on when I was working. There was in my local community in North Carolina at the time, there was a playground being built that was an accessible playground. So it was wonderful because students with all abilities, children, were going to be able to come and play and utilize the playground equipment. So that was great. It was a public park. And the news came to interview me because I was with the ARC at the time, a local chapter. And they said, why is it important for kids to have, for kids with disabilities to have access to play? I didn't even know what to say, except, well, why is it important for kids to play? And I always think back on that because it is just, sometimes the system gets in the way of just that natural thing, that the same reason it's important for kids to play is the same reason kids with disabilities play, and why I need friendships and relationships are the same for anybody else. So I think it's just always remembering that and bringing some intention to it.
And that
I want to just chime in for a second. I actually really want to hear what Jesse and Angela have to say about what helps them feel included. But really quick, just to piggyback on something that Tonya said, I think it's extremely important to be doing a better job measuring social inclusion from a research perspective. We do a bad job of it, to be honest with you, and we do not do like a apples to apples job of it. We don't have a standardized measure of social inclusion. And part of the reason for that is because of funding, if you want the truth. We cannot conduct research that's not funded, or cannot easily conduct high quality research that's not funded. And most of the funding streams preference really traditional areas of IDD research. So we certainly prioritize health, which is important. We prioritize research on employment and living situations, which is very important for sure. But there are very, very few opportunities to do research strictly on social inclusion. And that to me is hugely problematic and speaks to the measurement issue that Tonya was speaking about.
This is just fascinating because there's just so many thoughts here. You know, when you mentioned health, Matt, there's research that proves that friendships are good for our health. You know, that's part of why we're here today, to talk about it. And Tonya, you just keep reminding me, you know, people are people are people. And I've you know, I've lived overseas, I've seen it. You know, we have these biases in our head, but people are people. And I think when you add disability into it, and we, you know, that there's all this extreme bias from everyone. We have a couple comments before I want to, because I think the most important people to hear about social inclusion right now are Jesse and Angela. I'm going to just read these comments while we're here. So Lynn says, you know, social inclusion affects every other part of life, you know, and exactly, right? Health, everything. So we need the research. Dawn says social inclusion and friendships are directly tied to health and employment. Tammy says that, you know, everything needs to be inclusive. We need public group events that are inclusive, you know, that universal design piece that we talk about, but yet it's still not happening. And Lynn also brings up, you know, that hero complex, that sometimes relationships are based on non-disabled people wanting to be a hero instead of actually wanting to be a friend. And she also asks, what does inclusive programming mean to people with and without disability? And we need to have better discussions about what that is. I just wanted to throw those out because it's really good to have this interaction, and we're here so everyone out there watching can truly interact with us. So keep those comments and questions coming. Angela, let's start with you. You know, what do you say about social inclusion?
Yeah, I would like to go to something that Tonya said earlier.
I'd like to go back to something that Tonya said earlier.
Yeah, last year I discovered the accessible playground in Richmond.
Last year, I discovered an accessible playground in Richmond.
Yeah.
An accessible playground in Richmond.
I was with a good friend, Alexis, who also had a disability.
I was with my good friend Alexis, who also has a disability.
That's what we swim. We got to swim on the swim. We got to play on the merry-go-round.
And guess what? We got to swing on the swing, and we got to go around on the merry-go-round.
I got to climb the foot and look down on the playground.
I got to climb on the equipment and look down on the playground.
Yeah, and 36-year-old woman, I knew that Sydney.
I'm sorry, would you mind repeating that, Angela?
As a 36-year-old woman, I knew that's kind of silly.
And as a 36-year-old woman, I know that's kind of silly.
But that was kind of like the first time we got to really play on the playground.
And that was the first time that we ever really got to play on a playground.
Well, I think for me, yeah.
For me personally.
I think when I was a little girl, we had a swing at school.
And when I was a little girl, we had a swing at my school.
The wheelchair, but we had to get special permission. It took all day just to get on it.
And we had to get special permission, and it took a lot of time and effort to get on it.
just to be able to access and have a good time with my friends was life-changing for me.
And just being able to have access and have a good time with my friend is and was life-changing for me.
We got to connect with other kids and tell them why it was so cool for us to do.
And we got to connect with other kids and tell them why it was so important for us to be able to do that.
Yeah, and we can teach moment too.
And it became a teaching moment too.
That's awesome. I still love to swing. So I think that's a great story. It goes back to universal design and people being able to use public spaces together. Presence is how we get to inclusion. It's just being present. Well, in a meaningful way, but I mean, you have to be there first before you can start connecting. So that's a great story.
It is. I mean, I think about it like I'm a parent. I have kids. I swing with them. Just because you're 36 does not mean you shouldn't be able to swing, you know? Go for it. Jesse, you tell me, what is social inclusion? How can we make it happen?
Well, I think I really like what was said earlier about people finding common interests. Like I know a lot of my friends are through my church right now, so I know that's a big component of it. I think also some of my friends, at least online, are from. I do some writing, a little bit of writing, like short story stuff, and so I find other people who are do the same thing. So I think really find common interests and what you find what people are interested in, and then help them find other people who are interested in the same things. I think that would really open up more friendships. I think so. I think that is one of the keys. So
Yeah, those common interests that we all have, right?
yes.
Well, we're going to stay right with you, Jesse and Angela, first on this one, because the holidays, this is a lonely time of year for a lot of people. It brings back a lot of memories, can be tough and isolating, and combine that with a pandemic and not being able to be with friends and families. How can we support each other right now? And Jesse, let's start with you.
Ooh, I just think try to stay talking with people, and if you haven't talked with a friend or a family member in a while, make sure to connect with them, because you don't know, they could be very lonely right now. So just make sure keep up with people, and we're all supporting each other. Yeah.
Angela?
I think it comes from the teaching attitude. I think you have to be very intentional.
I think that you have to be very intentional.
I have friends that I trust and we are safe, but they know that I need to be with them.
I have friends and we stay in touch and communicate, and they know that I need to be in touch with them and build that relationship.
We call, we text, we send fish, we text messages.
We call and we text and we send silly messages back and forth.
I didn't like going to call. I was so nervous, but we just had to be intentional.
And sometimes I can get nervous, and we just have to be intentional.
Yeah. And also, I have to put the effort into. I
And I can't always wait for them to reach out to me and call me. I have to be intentional and call them as well.
And I need to talk to you. No, we forgot a time that worked for us.
And reaching out, just saying, hey, I need to talk to you. Let's find a time that works for both of us.
Yeah, that's important for everyone, right? Matt and Tonya, do either of you have anything to add on this part?
For me, I would say it's about remembering to connect, especially during this time when it's really hard. Back on the system, I do want to say, we were talking about what we pay for as a system. You know, the system really needs to be flexible so that it is following a person's life to do the things that they want to do, as opposed to, I think that a lot of and I don't mean this in a negative way or to criticize, but we who have done services for a long time, that is my background before coming here, providers or folks can be stuck in, we're going to build a program instead of, we're going to provide support. We're going to follow you in your life, whatever that is. And in order to do that, for providers to have that mindset and for direct support professionals to have that mindset, the system itself has to have the flexibility in there. It needs to be paid for. How often do we see goals? We know we have to have goals written to get paid for services, but how often does it say, you know, Jesse, how do you want to connect with people? How do you want to make friends? Have you talked to your family recently? Do you have any cousins you want to reach out to? Do you have social media? Do you like that? You don't like that? How often is that not what we're focusing on? And some people, they wouldn't like that, but to at least ask the questions to see if if folks want to connect in those ways. I think it's really important to check and think about the same opportunities that we all take and go through. And social media is a big one. And I think it's really great seeing everybody more involved on social media. And I think that services like community engagement, that sort of thing, it really has to be that it follows the person in their life, whatever that might be.
And speaking of social engagement and social media, you get a lot of yeses from both what Jesse, Angela said, and also what you said. And Joni says, you know, great point, person-centered. We have to support and be that way. And equal contributions to relationships and how important that is. And, you know, Tonya, when you were talking about the system, I can't help but think, like, if you're talking about the holidays, you know, we're talking about the system. How do you have support staff when they're not getting paid overtime and holiday time? And the system just doesn't allow for that support on the holidays, does it?
Well, we've certainly heard a lot of people that face that when they're living in their own spaces, which is what we want them to be doing. So then it goes back to planning and being focused on the person-centered. What is it that works for your life? You know, and Angela, you mentioned something earlier about friendships that you've created with people that you choose to support you. And sometimes I wonder, and this is just my thought, that we can get so caught up in what is that line, that professional line. Well, that's not the same for everybody. Maybe Jesse, in your life, you want to draw a certain kind of line because that's what's appropriate for you. But maybe Angela, yours is different and you really do want to hire. That's why we love, whether you're in person-directed services, consumer-directed, or an agency supporting you, you still should be making those decisions. And there are times that it would be rather unnatural to me not to forge a relationship with someone that I was with for 8 hours a day. That would feel unnatural. But for somebody else, they might really enjoy and want that line. And I don't think we can make a blanket statement. I think that people really have to define that for themselves, and we have to listen.
I agree with that, especially the staff relationships. It's like, because there's some staff where I would really want to be more friends with, and then some staff members I would really want to keep it professional. And you're right, you want to as soon as when I had that flexibility.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll add that I think this is an issue that the field has struggled with for a long time, and there's no clear answer to it. And far be it from any of us to define what a friendship means to anyone else, right? It's a very individual thing. And so two people can decide to define their relationship as they wish, I believe.
That is so well said, Matt. And also one of our commenters, Jenny, said something really profound. She said goals are far too often, they focus on productivity over the quality of life. And I think that's really important to remember.
Yeah, so thank you for that comment. One other thing that I wanted to say about what works to support social inclusion is to write that into goals, especially for adults with IDD, but also for kids in school. Having a goal that supports social inclusion is just as important as having a goal for a self-care task. It is part of self-care for sure. Social inclusion is. So if you can write that into plans, then your direct support workers are responsible for doing that. And they'll be responsible for helping you find the inclusion in the community that is meaningful to you. And you'll have to be a partner in it, by the way. People aren't going to do it for you. You have to take a role in it yourself.
Relationships are work. There's nothing wrong with building skills to do that. It's for all of us. Our friendships are work, and our other intimate relationships. It really is a working thing for all of us.
So much so. We're getting a couple more comments. Lynn says, there are all sorts of aspects of self-determination, and that includes our choice about boundaries. And then Joni said, we need to work with organizations on terms of agreement, the protocol and terminology and policies, which is also very valid. Moving on, we're talking about COVID, we're talking about the holidays and the importance of communicating. Some people with disabilities, and Jesse, the last time we talked, I think you mentioned this, they're reporting being more connected because of all this virtual stuff going on.
Right.
So, this is kind of a two-part, what lessons can we take with us now that we kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel of this pandemic? But also, how do we include people who have a lack of equipment and a lack of access to the internet? Jesse, why don't we start with you on this?
Well, for one thing, we need to find a way to get them that access if they don't have it. Because I think more and more in our society, it's really important for social lives and work lives and everything. Yeah, all of it. But I also think we can figure out how to translate the digital connections to real life ones as well, and how they work together to have relationships in the real world and virtually. And I think that's important as well.
Angela, how about you?
It's really hard for me because I have friends in Southwest Virginia.
It's really hard for me because I have friends in Southwest Virginia
Who are really like our family.
who are really like my family.
Who don't have internet access at their home.
But they don't have any access at their homes.
So we have to schedule a time where they're out in the community or out at McDonald's for them to talk.
So we have to schedule a time when they're out in the community or out at McDonald's for when we can talk.
It's it's really difficult because I know that they're going through a hard time and I can't just pick up the phone and call them.
And it can be really difficult because I know that they're going through a hard time and I can't just pick up the phone and call them.
I really wish I did and go with them, but I can't.
And I want to go down there and be with them, but I can't.
It's really, it's really hard because I know people who are already connected, and some people are just left out.
And so it's really hard because I know that there are some people who are very connected, and then there are others that are just left out.
Not my choice.
And not by choice.
Thanks, Angela. Tonya, what do you see? What do you think we can carry with us, and how can we improve that lack of technology and internet access?
Yeah, it is super important because we've seen the same thing that Jesse mentioned, people being more connected. COVID has made the rest of us get on technology, and in a way that created a real accessibility positive outcome for people, for many people. So we want to make sure that that continues, that it doesn't go away. We're actually working on a bill that will go in the General Assembly session 2021 that addresses virtual supports. And Jesse has been a big proponent of that. And it really grew out of the grassroots work of the Alliance, talking about that they wanted to be able to keep virtual supports and the assistive technology. Right now, there are financial funding limits on it, but also procedural limits that Jesse taught me quite a bit. Look at that. Yeah. You can probably tell us more about some of those things that are barriers to people getting the technology they need.
Yeah, there's a lot of bureaucratic hurdles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a create situation where I was able to, on paper, there's funding for me for assistive technology through my waiver, but I found in reality there wasn't, and I'm not the only one this has happened to.
Right. Yeah, you've heard from a lot of the friends in the Alliance that this is happening too. So in this particular bill, we'll be looking at the permanency of people having access to virtual supports, if that works for them, if that's what they want in their life. Because sometimes we want our supports, the things we're paying for, not to be in our space, but it can then also be used for connections and our friendships and our relationships and just interdependence together. And so we want to make sure that there's the funding there, and the like a laptop now is not so specialized. Everybody's going to need that to connect. And so if some of the rules that are written in the regulations right now could be changed, we want to address those changes in policy so that people can access through different kinds of vendors, different types of payments, taking away some of the wait times, things like that.
Matt, do you have anything to add on how we move forward?
Well, I certainly appreciate the fact that the COVID pandemic has kind of leveled the playing field in terms of digital accessibility, and has kind of forced a lot of community events to go online, which has been great for access. However, I do still have some concerns, because I feel like digital access, to Angela's point, is uneven depending on where you live regionally. Obviously, broadband is limited in many rural parts of the country. Also, people with disabilities are disproportionately low income, and having good technology is expensive. And so that stands to reason that many people with disabilities would be left out of access to digital spaces because of the cost. I also wonder from a philosophical standpoint whether the quality of online community is the same as quality of in real life community. And again, it's not for me to decide what is a quality relationship or a quality social interaction or quality community participation. But I do think that if we're going to rely more exclusively on virtual community, then we really need to recalibrate how we're thinking about what it means to be part of a community, what it means to have friendship, that sort of thing. Because traditionally we've thought about community participation as being in the community, you know, going out to the restaurant, going to the community event, that sort of thing. And is dialing into to an internet chat room and sitting on that chat room the same as joining your community gardening club? I don't know. I think that's largely up to individuals, but I think that we would be doing a disservice to people with disabilities and to people without disabilities if we say that we can just substitute virtual community for in real life community. And I think that will be a risk in moving forward. I also think it'll largely be a risk that we may move back towards protectionism after COVID, right? In the moment, we are very, very concerned about health and safety first, as we should be. But if we prioritize health and safety over the dignity of taking a risk to get out into the community after the pandemic is resolving, that's a huge problem to me. And I think that we cannot sell out laying on our haunches and being okay with life in virtual spaces when there's other life to be had. And so I think we need to be really careful about some of this thinking as well.
I think that's so important to remember, because I mean, we're making things more accessible, but that doesn't mean that physically we should not make things accessible. I think about workspaces too, which is separate from this, but you know, it takes a lot of effort to make businesses and restaurants and places accessible, and people might just use this as an excuse not to. So yeah, that's valid.
Well, and you made a great point about risks and the dignity of risk. It's something we always talk about. We know many people that were in supported employment that lost their jobs because if they weren't living in their own apartment, like we would hope a lot of folks want to do, if they were living in a group home, they were living under a rule that they couldn't go to work. Even several that were essential workers, they were working in grocery stores, had the kinds of jobs that their job didn't go away because it was essential workers. And they had to choose between staying where they lived, which happens to be a group home, not their own space where they have autonomy to make that decision about that risk. And so they had to choose where they lived or resigning their job. And I know a lot of people that had to resign their jobs. And that is really unfortunate. So you're right. I think we have to remember individual and remembering that they have those options and choices.
So clearly this is a topic that we could go on and on about because it's already 1:29. And we try to keep this as an hour, but I really want to ask this last question because I think this is important. When we really talk about changing, we need to start at the very beginning. And so, you know, there are a lot of families with young children that are just starting out on this journey. I want to hear what words of wisdom we have from them and how we can help nurture these meaningful relationships as our children grow. And, you know, Angela, I hope that maybe you can start and maybe share the story that you had at the bookstore. That to me is just kind of a cornerstone of what friendship means.
Yeah, so this is before everything shut down. Me and my 4 friends were at bookstore.
So before everything shut down, me and my 4 friends were at a bookstore.
Yeah, two of the
And two of the ladies that were with me, it was the first time we'd ever hung out outside of church.
We were sitting at a bookstore in the cafe part.
And we were sitting at the bookstore in the cafe section.
I was laughing loud like I was doing.
And I was laughing loud like I always do.
But I wasn't like disturbing. I was just reading my typical.
And I wasn't trying to be disturbing. I was just being my typical Angela.
No. This guy climbed nowhere. I walked him to the table.
And this guy came out of nowhere and he approached the table.
I started screaming across the table at me.
And started screaming across the table at me.
I didn't really understand what was going on.
And at the time, I didn't really understand what was going on.
I was just being protective of our two new friends.
But I was just being protective of my two new friends.
I don't want them to get hurt or anything.
And I didn't want them to get hurt or anything.
But and my other friend who's off to the side went off to the corner to be escorted out of the store.
And one of my friends went off to the side to the counter and asked that he be escorted out of the store.
Yeah, as you were escorted out, he just stared at me.
And after he was escorted out, he just stared at me.
But I had to tell two new friends, this is really disturbing when it has happened before.
And I had to tell my two new friends that it is really disturbing, but it has happened before.
Yeah, luckily, they still hang out with me. Loud.
And luckily, they still hang out with me.
But that gives you an idea. We still have so much work to do because this was in the last year.
And if this gives you an idea, it just shows how much work we still have to do, especially because this happened within the last year.
Well, and I wanted you to share that story too, Angela, because you had two new friends with you, but one older friend with you who knew how to handle that. And I think that familiarity is really important because people who aren't around children who aren't kind of raised with friends that have disabilities just don't know how to do the right thing in certain circumstances.
And I think now my two friends will know what to do if it happens again.
And I think now my two other friends will know what to do if it happens again.
They're very protective of our relationship in a good way.
And they're very protective of our relationship in a good way.
That's excellent. So again, going back to this, families with young children and how do we nurture these relationships as children grow? I just want to touch on that a little bit, final minutes, and have everyone just give their thoughts. Tonya, can you just go ahead?
To me, it's why inclusive education is so important. How in the world can children with and without disabilities grow up into a world where we understand and accept that we're all different, we're all unique? And maybe if that man at the bookstore, although he just was clearly a jerk, sorry that happened, Angela. But growing up where people who are different than you are part of your life. And I think it's just so key to start that at a young age and keep children included together with peers with and without disabilities.
Jesse?
Yeah, I think that is, which is like what Tonya said. I think the more, the more, especially when it's on, when you're a kid, or kids, able-bodied kids are around disabled kids, and everyone's together, it's better, and everyone will that we're just like everyone else, and I think that will improve socialization when we become adults. So yes.
And Matt?
I agree with all that's been said, but I would push it a step farther. I think that kids with disabilities and their parents need to really push to have inclusion, true inclusion, be a part of the life from a very, very young age. And to do some of these things we've been talking about throughout the session today. So find the natural connections, right? If your kid is super interested in basketball, then find out a way for the kid to be involved with the basketball team, right? If the kid really wants to, join some kind of school club or a band, figure out a way where that makes sense, right? Even if they're not going to be playing trombone, there's some way that the kid can be involved with the band, right? So to really be proactive and to really push the envelope on what inclusion means from a really young age. And also, the younger that you can get kids involved, the more that you can kind of model those inclusive relationships, and the more likely that those inclusive relationships will carry over into adulthood. Whether it's the same relationship with the same friend from a very young age on through adulthood, or if it's just the relationship skills that carry through, both for people with and without disabilities. We all need to develop relationship skills for inclusive relationships, and that has to start young.
And, to echo what you said, Matt, I think that's so important. I have a 10-year-old who has Down syndrome and he has 2 younger siblings. And I see exactly what you're talking about. But I want to remind any parents listening to let your child take the lead. Don't try to force your interests on them. Find what they love to do, because then they're just going to want to do it more. Angela, do you have any final words about this before we totally wrap up?
I just want to say that it is possible. Everything we said, it is possible.
I just want to say that it is possible. Everything that we've been talking about is possible.
My fourth grade best friend that I met when I was 8 years old.
And my first best friend that I met when I was 8 years old.
It's still my last friend. I come for everything.
And there's still one of my best friends through everything.
So he's that sport. I help her too.
She helps support me and I help her too.
I she works in the disability field also.
And she works in the disability field also.
I think it's because of that relationship.
And I think it's because of that relationship.
So, yay.
So yay.
Yay is right. I just want to, Irene says parents can encourage their children to talk about the situation in the classroom. Most of the time, if the children are informed what is helpful and not helpful, they can find something fun and something they can do that they might not be able to. And she said, this is great to hear this. And this has been really great. I mean, anyone listening, you just send us a message, post in the comments. We're going to be doing these in 2021, at least twice a month. Any ideas you have, something you want to discuss, you want advocates, you want professionals, we'll bring them on. We'll have a conversation. And I also want to remind you, we have a talk about sex education coming up in January, and relationships, romantic relationships coming up in February. So those will both be really great topics. Thank you all for joining us, and happy holidays.
Thank you.